Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Secretary.
Morning.
I'm going to flip to bonding and bonds and some issues there. To start, the governor's budget includes a proposal to have the Commonwealth Financing Authority issue nearly $400 million in bonds to fund program expenses that have always been handled with current revenue. And then the bond funds would be dispersed over a 3-year period to pay for programs rather than provide general fund appropriations. Is bond issuance for current current expenses prudent fiscal management? That'd be my question. I'd like to hear your answer on that.
Again, as I had mentioned earlier already, there are a couple things. There are things in this proposed budget that if our Commonwealth was in a stronger fiscal position, we would rather not do. But to make ends meet, to make the budget balance, there are a couple steps that are short-term steps, if you will. They continue the practice that has been taken, particularly over the past 10 years, to prudently to try to avoid the need for any broad-based tax increase for middle-class families by taking steps in the short term to bring our budget in balance, but still fund the obligations of the Commonwealth. What we've tried to do is be very careful about what those steps are, to go back to Representative Daley's questions, to make sure that not only are we bringing our budget into balance for the next fiscal year, but we're also putting the state back on a responsible fiscal course for the future and actually growing the reserves of the state as we go forward. So we have to calibrate those one-time steps to make sure that in this case they are less in total than the roughly $600 million that's necessary to pay off what we project to be a one-time budget imbalance that we're going to have to pay for in the 17-18 fiscal year with the budget shortfall that we project ending this fiscal year. So to answer your question, it's something that we would rather not have to do, but it's a prudent step that we think that we can take this year to, again, put us on a course.
Yeah, I understand. I have limited time here. I do want to kind of follow up, and I know Representative Daley, I believe, we talked about this. In recent years, the bond rating agencies have cited our reliance on one-time revenue sources as a credit negative. You said you're kind of waiting, I think, but have you talked or discussed with them what we're doing or what we're considering? Because aside from my concern about increasing debt on our future generations, I am concerned that moving forward with this proposal could adversely affect our credit rating here in the Commonwealth. That's just my thoughts.
Right. So we will begin those discussions, as I just previously mentioned. Our first scheduled meeting, I believe, with S&P is on the calendar for next week. Again, because we want to be careful about calibrating those steps to make sure that we're providing for a solid fiscal future, we don't believe that that's the case. We do think that, for example, the more important parts of our state budget are taking steps to, for example, fully fund our pension liability so that that $62 billion debt that we've now accrued, that we begin to spend that down and don't let that grow any further. And again, I think in the governor's view, our hope is that we take a look at those programs and maybe over the course of that 3-year period where we're using bond proceeds to fund some of those programs, maybe in some cases or for all of them, we can find alternative funding sources to support those programs in the future.
I'll tell you, I got 5 minutes. I'm going to switch gears here. Sure. I'm going to switch to the farm show now. Because speaking of borrowing, because I asked one of the other secretaries, I really struggle with you talk about prudent fiscal management. We're supposed to what's called $200 million of savings by leasing the farm show back from ourselves. So we're getting $200 million. We're paying back over a period of, I think it's 29 years. And wanted to get your insight into, because I'm not sure how anybody can reasonably call using debt, using a credit card on one hand and switching it to the and then to get money and then pay it off on the other hand and put money in debt service. I mean, I do struggle with this concept. I mean, is it going to be the Capitol building next year that we try to do this with? I mean, that is a concern of mine.
So if we adopt the budget as we proposed it, or again, in working with the General Assembly, we find for those programs or suggestions that people aren't comfortable with reasonable alternatives. And we put the state on, again, a fiscal path where we eliminate, as we would hope to do with this proposed budget, our structural budget deficit going forward. We don't need to take any of these future steps. In this case, though, we have a strategic opportunity. We've invested over the course of the last 15 years more than $150 million in capital improvements at the Farm Show complex. It creates for us the opportunity now to raise that $200 million in the short term to, again, balance in full our 17-18 budget. And we will, as you point out, have to repay in lease payments over the course of 29 years that borrowing. But again, it's a strategic opportunity that gives us an opportunity to balance our 17-18 budget now, with the understanding that we carefully calibrate the number of those things that we do in this proposed budget, so that when we look to the 18-19 fiscal year and every year thereafter, we no longer have any structural deficit, and we don't have to rely on any of those short-term options to put our fiscal house in order.
Thank you. I see my red light was on a long time ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Representative